Looking for a home that keeps you connected to Silicon Valley without the usual barriers to entry? The Gates in Morgan Hill by City Ventures is a walkable neighborhood near downtown restaurants, outdoor trails, and an easy commute to the Bay Area. It's a small town setting with access to major career hubs. Every home is all electric with buyer-owned solar included. With limited availability, now's the time to take a closer look. Discover your new home at cityventures.com. That's cityventures.com.
Alright guys, welcome to the show. I hope you sat there, either fucking scantily clad or dressed in your World Around You branded clothing. If you're not, go to worldaroundyou.com, order yourself a t-shirt, listen to these shows, and then come back to these shows when you've got your t-shirt and listen to the show in your t-shirt. Anyway, I'll let you crack on with the show. Alright guys, I'm the World Around You, and this is Pause for Thought on Threshold FM. Now, I've been away for a few weeks, trying to work on a book about torturing sloths, but I thought I'd put a show together, and I'm gonna, they'll be coming more regular in that again. Though if you're listening to these on demand, not really gonna make a difference to you. They'll still be coming out pretty much every week. But I'm hoping this week we can hopefully learn something a little bit different from the last episode, which I think were about Tracy Weaver. Which little disclaimer, made it all up. It was my Christmas tale. That was the Christmas special that went out Christmas time on Threshold. But it doesn't really matter because it's not all that Christmassy anyway. But this week, what are we learning about? Well, they're easily the deadliest thing in the world. Responsible, right, for a lot of deaths and probably even more injuries than they are deaths. Often coming to our country from overseas on the back of boats by the thousands. They roam our streets day and night, right? But at night, they can be even more deadly, Especially if the black ones are usually the most dangerous of them all, according to statistics. They're often accomplices in a big part of murders, rapes as well, and even very well executed burglaries. Now, obviously we can't tarnish them all with the same brush. Some of them are very family orientated, but they are always prevalent in certain crimes. Like these crimes only rarely happen with these, let's call them things, Now, and because without them, some of these crimes would be, entirely impossible. But maybe they're the cause for other crimes throughout history, maybe even responsible for causing neurological disorders in young people. But is this their first time here? Were horses their substitute for a while? Hopefully, we'll touch on at least some of these things, because this week we're discussing the one enemy of cyclists the world over. The motorised vehicle, aka a car. But first, let's have a song. This is Nas, John Legend and Florian Picasso with Tomorrow. Cars, right, yeah? They've been around for ages, innit? Slowly improving. Whilst computer chips get better every 2 years, though, according to Moore's law. So why are cars so stunted? They've been getting used for longer than computer chips, well longer. Now, where's the improvements for the user? They've been getting used for, fucking long distances. Maybe they'll add in a cup holder or something like that, but that's not a real improvement, innit? They've just been few and far between. Even when we was on horseback, right, we'd be looking to breed the horses with better horses, to genetically alter the horses, long before the genetic splicing facility in the moon was even hinted at in the Disney movies. So why are cars all very similar? Sure, there's front and rear wheel drive, that's a difference. There's three-wheelers, four-wheelers, four-door, three-door, five-door, sliding doors, suicide doors, automatic and manual gear change, but where's the big improvements? Where's the descending wheels that drop from the middle of the chassis at a 90-degree angle to the regular wheels to aid in parallel parking so the car just slides sideways into its spot? There's now more than there's ever been of people knocking about, right? And more densely populated areas. So that seems like the next logical step for a car, at least like 10 years ago. And it's still not there, isn't it? Where are all the cars that can drive through these deep puddles from the floods we keep having, from the so-called man-made climate change, That, why can't they drive through these puddles without being fucking ruined? Where are the cars that have a built-in cooler box and a built-in oven, so that when you go shopping after work, because everyone's working longer and longer hours, that they can't keep your beers cold and start cooking your pizza so that it's ready for when you get home? Also, when you get home, you've only got to put it in the oven for 5 minutes rather than 15. They just don't exist. So what are they really for? But before we get into all that, how long have they been here? Now, the records of ancient people discussing the gods that visited from the skies, they all describe things like chariots with lightning and thunder and fire. They detail excessive weapons that caused cancers and ruined crops wherever they went and wherever they landed, Now, to me, that sounds a lot like some form of motorised vehicle, doesn't it? Maybe even a spaceship. But there's a good chance that what these were actually some form of time traveller or alien in massive machines that were spewing out chemicals and smoke. And I'm not the only person and the first person to claim that, and I'm not going to claim to be. But I do have a little thought about time travellers there. Now, if we can in essence become a time traveller, we can, because you've got that thing where a watch will be a second behind if you spend a bit of time on the space station. But there's that idea if you travel for 40 years or 20 years in one direction out into space and 20 years back, the Earth will be 100 years in the future. But what if you was to go the other way? Surely there must be a different way to do that so you can go back in time. Maybe they did it accidentally at some point and then they were like, fuck, we've gone back thousands of years, but it's only been 30 years for us, and they've got all this mad stuff because maybe they're from our future. Not like they've come back here from our future, but we're in the future and we've gone back to our past now in these better spaceships or whatever, because we're taller and bigger, because apparently we've been growing and growing and growing since we've been evolving. Because obviously we all used to be about 3 foot tall, and now we're not. We're a lot bigger. But that's just a thought anyway, and it's a bit away from what we were going to discuss. It's a lot more reasonable, innit, to believe that time travellers were in spaceships and these things in these chariots were actually machines and aliens, if you like, than to believe that the African or the more specifically Nigerian god called Shango rode on a horse and he had the power of thunder, fire and lightning. Because if that was true, right, he'd be getting through fucking horses like the Workshire getting through lateral flows, mate. It's much easier to believe that there was once a group of people who existed with access to technology that could be equal to our own, but back 3,000 years ago, it might have seemed advanced to the people that they were invading, because, that's what you've got to see it, innit? You've got to see it as an invasion of sorts. You can't overlook that Shango could have been flying a spaceship and all, or maybe did actually own some form of magical horse, but what if horse is just a word that we use in historical documents to make people believe that time is moving slower, or to make us feel special? What if we'd always had cars and vans and the paedophiles that drive vans, but somehow, right, someone came along and was like, I want to control these people and control what they think, and they're like, let's swap out white van man for chariot racer. And then back in Roman times, we think everyone in the Roman times nowadays was like, oh, we highly regard the chariot races, and that's why there was so much written about chariot races. But think about all the newspapers and that from when you was a kid, and all the stories you heard about white van men, white van men, right? White van man, right? White van mans. Like the fellas in white vans that would abduct kids and that, and maybe the odd old woman every now and then. We had loads of stuff written about them because we needed to know about them. Maybe that's what chariot racers were back then, but they didn't call it the white van man. They called it the chariot racer. Because, to be honest, realistically, how are we supposed to know any different? It becomes even more believable when you remember about Anatoly Fomenko. We've spoke about him quite a few times now, and his theory that who or whatever Jesus actually was based on something that happened 800 years ago rather than 2,000 years ago. So if you look at history in that sense, this 3,000 BC or whatever these gods were, realistically could have been, 2,500 years ago, so 500 BC. But the Nigerians aren't the only people to go on about so-called horses throughout history. I've collated a few examples here in my notes of where scholars may have retconned our history to ignore the machines, right? There was a belief that horses would carry you to Valhalla, which we can see isn't true, and it ties in with the idea of horses replacing machines, because if you've ever been to Blackpool Pleasure Beach, on the way to Valhalla, there is machines in the queue. Rather than, there's no depiction of horses from memory. There's vending machines, I think, that give out thin plastic ponchos, which in this iteration of the mythical realm, and the horses are actually reserved for the steeplechase, possibly a way to try and affect children's minds to seeing horses and other equestrian species as relegated to a position of servitude. And especially when you consider, like the donkey rides in Blackpool Beach and the horse-drawn carriages down the seafront. Now, right, consider what I think the Brazilian traditions. Maybe traditions is the wrong word, but I think it's a Brazilian habit. I don't know what the word is, but think about what they do with donkeys and that. It's definitely South America at least, but they view they view the donkey as more of an equal in some of their entertainment at least. Sometimes in certain shows, maybe it's even the donkey's more important than the human counterpart. But modern donkey shows aren't the only time a horse has been equal to a person. There are some Buddhist stories, and one of them's about this prince who he decided to forego his life of riches to explore the world around him. And when his journey came to an end, and it was, I imagine, time to shoot his horse in the back of the head, like a CIA whistleblower, his horse got granted reincarnation into an enlightened human being, which I guess if you remember the Life Actor episode, maybe that's what happens nowadays. But we replace horse with possibly a robot clone, or a clone of a person, or just a person wearing a mask on the face of some sort, or holographic projection on them, and then when they do their task, they become a different being of a higher stature kind of thing. But that's grasping at straws. Now, it seemed to be a bit of a low blow, though, to this prince, because the whole intention of his journey was to become enlightened, so it seems a bit cruel that his horse would become an enlightened human being, but I've got no idea if he managed it, so it's got to have been a bit bittersweet for the guy, but maybe that's all part of his journey, of his learning. Now, the earliest record I could find of horses being domesticated comes from about 3500 BC in Kazakhstan. Now, we mainly know this because there was this pair of competing neighbours. One of them got a mule, and then the other one next door got a mule. So it's written, and then the first guy got a donkey, and the neighbour next door got a donkey and all. And then the first guy got a horse. And this was considered to be supposedly the greatest success of the country, as for quite a while it's believed to have been the first and only horse domesticated in the world, because the other guy couldn't get his hands on one. Now, what I think is mental there is, where do you get that horse from, right? So, I know you get that cliche of, he was the guy who first, played with a cow's teat, but you can imagine, you can see an animal suckling on the teat of its mother, and you think, well, it's good enough. It's good enough for the goose, so it must be good enough for the gander, kind of thing. Probably a terrible animal in example, because they come from eggs. Yeah. But I don't know it's good for the calf, it's good for the heifer. It doesn't really work. But for the horse, like what had he seen riding a horse and going, we should do that and all? Because maybe that's where the Uncanny Valley thing comes from. Maybe there was this other species of creature on the earth, and they would ride horses around, and we were like, you know what? It's a fucking belting idea, that. Let's nick some of their horses and breed them and sell them and eat them. Fucking horse meat's one of the best meats I've ever eaten, mate, in Italy. They give you, like, horse fillet, and it's fucking like hair. It's just shredded fine like hair. Bit of Parmesan cheese, bit of salt, squeeze a lemon, mix it all together in a bowl and just eat it like crisps, mate. It's fucking well nice. It's not even cooked, just raw. It was lovely. But it's like, historically, though, getting back to this, probably the most important relationship believed by many of these historians is the relationship between horses and people, and anthropologists and that, But let's have a song, and I'll tell you where this starts to make sense with the topic, because this show's supposed to be about cars and not horses. This is Hustlers by Lupe Fiasco. There are some mythical horses as well. You've got unicorns, which supposedly stem from Christianity for most people, but they also get discussed a little bit in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which we touched on, I want to say 6 episodes ago, in the Great Flood at least. In the Christian story, though, the Garden of Eden, which we should probably do an episode on, really. The unicorn didn't get punished by God, or was it Enki or Enlil or whatever was in charge of Eden in the in Gilgamesh's story, whatever it is you believe anyway, that created the things in the garden. The unicorn was allowed to leave the garden of its own volition with Adam and Eve because it felt love towards them both, right? So what if the unicorn is allegorical for some sort of technology? What if the God character can be replaced with the term lizard people? And furthermore, what if that technology was the genetically engineered biomechanical creature known as the Greys? Little thought for you. The same creature that Aleister Crowley drew, that exists with its massive forehead, and he accompanied him throughout his life of bumming that poor bloke that he dragged around with his life in the desert when he was bumming that guy in the sand. And if the Greys truly are a biomechanical feats of an unknown science and are able to exist in the fourth dimension, then surely that is exactly what is meant by unicorn. Because there's never been any record or actual sightings of unicorns, yet there's been tons of reported sightings of greys. Now, if you wanted to, you could view the unicorn another way, and imagine the unicorn to be a weaponised horse, which could easily be construed as a tank, I guess in a certain light because of the extension on its head. Kind of resembles a tank, but it's definitely a horn. But if you wanted to take it a little bit, remove it a little bit, that horn is a weapon on a horse, and the horse could mean machine or car or vehicle. So it is a weaponised vehicle, a weaponised horse. Then you've got these other machines, though, that have been replaced with horsey terms in mythology, if you take that stance. Pegasus, a flying horse, a flying machine, a helicopter or a plane, or even a spaceship, mate. And finally, you've got the centaur. But getting back to the spaceship bit, maybe it was just their way of going Pegasus. It's a flying horse, because if only like a group of 10 people or so saw the spaceship and saw them ride it, and they were riding horses around, and normally... And they were like, oh, fucking hell, how are we going to explain this to people? Let's explain it as a horse, a flying horse. Because we use a horse to move around. They use that to move around. That must be the horses where they come from. And they've seen them feeding it, in their eyes, putting fuel in or whatever it is that would power a spaceship. And they're thinking, oh, silage looks different on their planet, doesn't it? But the centaur, right? The centaur takes some of the argument that I put forward about the Greys. It's half man, half horse. Now, when you hear about it from historians, right, it's like an abomination of nature. It's a creature not too dissimilar from the Minotaur, But if you remember that horse could mean machine, then that means it's half man, half machine. A cyborg, maybe. Now, they're described as being stronger than a man, faster than a man, more aggressive and more feared than men. Most importantly, though, is a love of drinking, which, as I'm saying with the fuel, which it means they've got a constant requirement for liquids. Now, fuel is mostly liquid when we put it in machines, so could this have been oil or petrol maybe? Possibly, at a push even diesel. It's difficult to know for sure if centaurs could have been sentient machines, but it's not impossible to imagine that at least one could have been. And maybe it wasn't evil. Maybe the others all seemed evil because they were programmed to fight, like the metal men that we learnt about in the Robots and Automatons episode. One centaur that fits the bill, though, would be Chiron, Chiron, which was often described as intelligent, wise, as an oracle. So could... that means they had access to algorithms, potentially. They could work out the future and potential activities that could take place. And supposedly, right, this Chiron gave teachings to many of our philosophers. So what's easier to believe? That there was one half man, half horse, and creature that was dead clever and could speak, which sounds ridiculous, or that there were one half man, one half horse creatures roaming the fields that were actually some form of machine man in ancient times. We're supposedly the closest we've ever been to transhumanism in like modern day now. But what if we're only the closest to transhumanism in the same way those memes that go about depict 30 years ago and 30 years ahead, saying things like, 2052 is as far away as 1992 was. Do you know what I mean? Like, we could be just the same distance away, but we just think, oh, fucking hell, aren't we great? But bringing up the lizards, though, getting back to them for a minute, there's loads of traditions of man and horse defeating lizards or giant reptiles throughout history. One of them's obviously the story about St. George, which I read about. St. George was something to also do with, I think it was saving a Muslim child or something, which I've never heard before. I didn't know that. I only knew of St. George as slaying the dragon, or the dragons. But you've also got St. Patrick, who chased off the snakes in Ireland, and I'm going to bet that St. Patrick probably rode some form of quote-unquote horse from time to time. But if these horses are actually greys, then maybe we worked with the greys to overthrow or chase away the lizard people overlords. Maybe the lizard people cast the greys into another realm, or cast us to another realm, and that's actually what the story of the Garden of Eden is about. The Garden of Eden could have been, part of the fourth dimension, and we got cast out with some form of benevolent machines to fend for ourselves away from the genetic engineering leaders of the fourth dimension, the lizard people. When I was reading up on some of this stuff about horses and that, and trying to see if I was right and if it was a possibility, I found out there was a story where Horus kills Set whilst riding a horse, which goes against what I told you a few weeks ago in the ancient Egyptian creationism episode, where Horus was actually said to be riding a ship or a boat. Now, I'm wondering if horse is a word that gets used to replace the word ship, boat, car, plane, spaceship, motorbike, hovercraft. It could be, even like, because it's a thing that everyone can recognise. Everyone knows what a horse is, whereas the word car might mean different things to different people. Everyone knows a horse is a horse and can imagine it as that. Also, it's a way to hide history and conceal it and change little bits. But if you change enough little bits, like just by changing all these instances of cars throughout history, with replacing it with horses. Look how popular horses now have become. Look at these courses for horses, fucking equestrian courses, at colleges and stuff. It's fucking mad, mate. And instead of fucking mechanics, people are learning how to fucking feed a horse. It's ridiculous. Whereas they could be teaching kids at school, Horus drove a spaceship with his kind of mate, the anti-hero, let's call him, and killed Set repeatedly from his spaceship. But they don't. These people that I read this story from are saying he did it on a horse, which doesn't even seem practical. How could he have rode across the skies in a horse? Unless it was Pegasus, which was probably a helicopter. It just seems that they can change that term of whatever the thing was, the mode of transport. They can just replace it with horse, and it helps it to fit the person's belief who's got that story in front of them, regardless of language or culture. But let's have a song. This is Defender by Aesop Rock. It's the Blockhead remix. Now, we know that back in the day, they had the movement of people, innit? The Vikings had boats, and other people probably had actual horses. Now, we're led to believe that a lot of people just walked around, marching in armies or trundling through mountains before turning on each other and killing each other like the people in the Donner Party did. So I find it impossible to believe that there was a time where people weren't using horses. I find it much easier to believe that there was a mode of mechanical transport, though either a car or something like a car that has been used for thousands of years, and then it got destroyed, or civilization was destroyed and cars couldn't be used anymore. And one group of people, right, you've got to consider with this is the Romans. They're known for making straight roads. But if they weren't using fuel, then why did they have to make the roads straight? Because they're not saving money, they're not saving fuel and making it as cost effective as possible. And if they didn't have cars, that means that these things were made for horses. So if historians are supposed to be as pedantic as they are, and everything's got to be exact, and science has to be right and exact, and every story has to be true, then why is that a phrase? Why is that a thing? The Romans made straight roads. Why doesn't everyone say the Romans were known for building straight bridle ways or paths? But it's explicitly told to us that they made roads. We already know the Romans had access to robots from the Robots and Automatons episode. So it just seems odd, innit? Like, why lie? Why lie about them having horses? They could, if they had them robots, them tin men, the metal men, the silver men, then they could easily have had some form of car or lorry. The idea of a bloke or a lady suddenly going, this walking malarkey is ridiculous. We should sit on those horses and have them drag boxes of stuff along these bridleways, and maybe we should pave these bridleways and call them roads. There's just way too many holes to the theory, like literal plot holes. It doesn't make sense. It's a lot easier to believe that they had some mode of transport at some point and then lost it and then made do with horses whilst they waited to develop that technology again. It doesn't even take a high IQ to be able to see that as plausible. Or maybe instead of waiting for the right technological leaps to occur, they had to wait to find a fuel source that was suitable again. Maybe all of their scientific records were on paper and ancient computer chips, and having lost the computers that used those chips and the paper being, rotted away or got burnt, it may be due to the apparent intergalactic nuclear war with the Martian lizard people, possibly, if you believe that the lizard people are from Mars and not an extra-dimensional entity. It's up to you, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. Maybe the people of ancient times slowly lost knowledge of it all, just naturally. Maybe that's why book burnings have occurred throughout the history, and libraries have been raided. What if the clay tablets from Sumeria and whatever the scrolls were that the British government pretended were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq had detailed on them were ancient knowledge or other fuel sources, Maybe that's why after a long repeated campaign in Iraq and surrounding areas we're finally able to have rechargeable batteries or solar power and electric cars. Perhaps there was a new world leader, like Genghis Khan or someone, that decided to destroy all these records or to destroy the vehicles in order to control the movement of people again. A lot like how people believe electric cars are going to be introduced to limit the movement of people. Because think about it, like they've got to limit the distance they can travel due to having to plug the car into the mains. Once the battery stops holding its charge for as long, the wire's only going to go so far, so you can probably only have a kilometre long wire, and they're all going to get tangled in that, and no one's ever going to go anywhere. They're all going to start walking around again. Maybe this is why we started using horses in the past, because we were like, these fucking electric cars are stupid. They don't hold the charge. There's no such thing as a trickle charge. So we charge the cars overnight. It ruins the batteries. We don't want to keep buying new batteries because it's bad for the environment. Man-made global fucking climate change and all that again. We can't be having that. We've already tried to solve that. So we'll plug them in, and then maybe some clever bastard will come along. Instead of everyone going, let's use horses again while we work this out and fucking develop oil-powered cars again, someone might come along and go, do you remember Scalextrics? We could put a little dent along the ground, and it's like on tracks, like a tram, but it's a car, and you just jump in it. You can get in there yourself, or you could rent it out for the day. And, homeless people could fuck in there and take, whatever drugs they got in there while you're at work, and they leave you 50p in the fucking, in the bit where you throw your cigs when you get in the car. And then other people jump in and they're like, oh, they only left 50p. I'll have that. And then you're out of pocket. All because of these fucking electric cars, mate. It's fucking stupid. And it won't be the first time that cars have been used to potentially affect the population either. There's a good chance we initially used fuel with lead in it because we couldn't find this ancient information. But what if, right? What if it was being used to purposely alter the neurological habits of children? What if it was being used to alter the very air we breathe? To change our genetics? We're pretty sure that it was happening even scientists claim it was happening. The hard part, right, is to prove that it was all done on purpose. Changing the chemical makeup of a planet, right, that's called terraforming, which I imagine you all know. Now, one of the best ways to do that, apparently, is hit a planet with various nuclear blasts. Something that started happening in the 1940s and then continued for a little while. But we also started using a lot more cars around then as well. So if we couple up the catalysing effect, let's call it, of nuclear explosions in our atmosphere with the cars that drove around pumping out lead into the air along with whatever else was mixed in back then you've got to think it must have been on purpose, especially when you've read stuff that suggests the whole Prohibition era of America was mostly because ethanol could have been used for fuel, which could have been better for the people breathing it in, but maybe the ethanol may have had other undesirable effects in the air, maybe making people docile or something, which isn't really what you need when you're ramping up a Cold War on either end of Europe and also trying to kill imaginary Chinese people in a Vietnamese jungle. You need people angry, innit? You need them impulsive. You need people ready for war. And it turns out inhaling a shitload of lead will definitely do that to a person. Gets you all riled up for some reason. Now, I once saw a couple of lads at school repeatedly stab each other in the thighs with pencils, and they seemed to get more and more aggravated as well. But they were graphite pencils, innit? But it just goes to show that people just need that little push towards violence. And it seems to me that's exactly what leaded petrol was to a lot of people. Now, we already know that fuel is used to control society in terms of the economy, but most people probably don't know it affected communities on a smaller scale by increasing the murder rate and general violent atmosphere. Since lead's been removed from petrols, there's been a huge decrease in violence as well through the past 40 years. People have become smarter, there's an increase in IQ, and there's been at least 50 million crimes prevented as a direct effect according to the UN. Anyway, let's have a song. This is a guy who's a Threshold favourite. Apparently it's Mr. Traumatic with Demon Flow. If you're enjoying this, right, do you know what you might like? You might like a fucking Bollock Boy, mate, which is a little robot with mouse testicles in. £6 on worldaroundyou.com. There's other stuff as well, you know, like mystery boxes and fucking things I've made out of rats and dead ducklings and that, so fucking give them a look, mate. The prices start at like fucking £1 for a piece of fossilised shell. And then prices vary going up. You can also get shirts in that as well from there. But go and have a look, mate, worldaroundyou.com. But I'm guessing if you've found this, you already know about all the taxidermy. But still, you know, maybe now's the time to treat your missus to a little mouse heart. You know, I don't know you, though. I can't tell you what to do. I'm just glad you're listening to the shows. I'll fucking let you crack on. Cars are also, though, they're also responsible for cleaning up bits of society. They're not just used to change the atmosphere and the temperature of the earth. I mean, that's obviously if you believe in man-made global warming as it currently stands. But we've already learned that terraforming is real, and it's a real possibility. But that's not the only terror they're forming. Cars should be striking terror into the hearts of every man, woman and child the world over. They're solely responsible for more deaths than mosquitoes. Now, mozzies rack up about 1 million deaths a year, whereas cars manage to rack up about 1.3 million kills a year. Now, to put this into perspective, if you were playing Call of Duty, that would mean you'd get about 14,000 extra nukes if you were getting nuke kill streaks one after the other, which is mental. Like, that's a lot, innit? That's a lot of fucking people. They're even more dangerous than the world's most deadly animal, the cow, and the world's second most dangerous creature, the deer. Now, when bovine and ruminants are thrown in with cars, or more specifically, thrown in front of cars, they combine together to kill even more people. So if cars are so dangerous, then why aren't bicycles made illegal? It'd be deemed irresponsible to ride a unicycle down a road, so it's never really made sense to me that having this extra wheel suddenly makes it okay. Like, that makes it safe. You know, you've got 2 wheels, so that's fine to ride next to or sit next to this 1.5 tons of metal filled with accelerant. And now, I'm sure I've covered this before, but bikes should be illegal. It makes no sense that they're even a thing. I'm starting to believe there are enemies, whoever they are, be it a country that's insidiously infecting the minds of the youth through education or something like that, or the big, they. Maybe it is the big they, but they're trying to make more people ride bikes. Maybe that's so that they can be injured. Now, this would affect the world in various ways, isn't it? It removes the healthier members of society as they're killed off. It also removes them or limits the chances of breeding as well, because in another sense, if they're not killed off, because it's very, very off-putting to a woman when she finds out that a grown man is actually a cyclist. By having more cyclists on the road, it also means that they become a larger political voice, meaning maybe they start to get rights. It also gives a group of people an identity, which they can use to play the game of identity politics by having more RTAs, road traffic accidents, with cyclists as victims as well. A politician could easily be swayed to ban cars in certain areas to make it safer for cyclists, right? But they could even be persuaded to install some form of scale-electric system like what I spoke about before, in their constituency, so that cars are less likely to knock some dickhead off a bike. This, right, This should be a fucking huge concern for you, because that means less freedom. Yeah, it means you could probably start drinking and driving because you won't actually be driving, which in a way I guess is a new freedom, but you also won't be able to just nip down that side road and avoid the traffic lights. Is it worth giving up a freedom for the sake of a cyclist? Another way that our enemies could use our use of cars against us is, again, by encouraging everyone to cycle, because this means there's less people using fuel, less people buying oil, less screen wash, and that means less plastic bottles being made by these people with fucking jobs making plastic bottles. It means less people in jobs mining the resources for making plastic bottles, less people mining oil, less people on oil rigs. Oil rigs are fucking well-paid jobs, and that's a lot of money coming out of our country then being removed, and less big houses being built, more smaller houses, which means, everyone hates landlords. That means landlords have got more houses to rent out because there's more houses rather than less houses, but they're bigger and privately owned. And all these other repeat purchases necessary for keeping our economy strong and our cars going. They only need to buy a new helmet as well when they fall off their bike, and a pump. They'll buy one pump probably for the life of the bike, maybe for two bikes, because it provides free air for their tyres. They don't have to go to a petrol station and pay 50p for some air. They don't even need a car battery to get it going, mate. The pump, they can just pump it themselves, because a bike tyre doesn't have the same pressure in it as a car. No MOTs, so mechanics are losing money. Cycling proficiency isn't compulsory, so driving instructors can't just take on a new role using their transferable skills from the previous role. Those lads that hang around at the junction by Foster's Brewery on the way to Manchester with a squeegee and a dirty rag, they'll have to find a new way to try and fucking annoy people when they're on the commute to work. There's just a lot of moving parts to this that needs to be considered before the bike people start taking over. And right at the root of it all is this fear of global warming, something that may have been introduced to play on the emotions of people that have been brought on. Say the emotions have been brought on, let's say, by these fucking chemicals in the air that have been used to enhance the air around them. Maybe that's what lead in petrol was good for. It kept people angry, innit? If you're always angry, you're not worrying about the world or about the ozone layer. You're focused on your own life. Maybe blinkered to it, but still focused. Maybe the new fuels enhance different emotions. Maybe that's why they're called E-something. They put E numbers in food and sweets, and that makes kids act a certain way. Yet we've got E numbers in our petrol, and we know that stuff in petrol can make people act a certain way, but yet scientists weren't on, telly warning parents about that on TV. They just wanted to make people stop eating the blue Smarties because they affect their kids. But what about this E10 fuel? It's obviously going to cause a different emotion than the E5 fuel did. I don't know how the emotions are ranked, but because it's E10 and that was E5, this could either be twice the intensity of the previous emotion or half the intensity of the previous emotion. Only time's going to tell us, though. That's what's a shame about this. It'll be too late to know, just like it was with the lead. Well, we know that cars can be used to terraform a planet, but what or who could they be terraforming for? I know you're asking yourselves that, thinking, what's this going to be for? Now, put simply and plainly, interdimensional entities, mate. There are many beliefs that mirrors can in fact act as portals. Mirrors are doorways or windows or entrances, let's call them, for demons and extra-dimensional entities into our dimension. Now, there is a Jewish belief, and I think there's some Irish that go for it and all. So they'll cover the mirrors when there's been a death, because it's possible to then see demons in your house through the mirrors in the week surrounding a death, like afterwards, and maybe the second week after. But now think about a car for a minute. Each car has at least 3 mirrors. That's 2 wing mirrors and a rear view mirror. Maybe even an extra one in the sun visor for the passenger seat. That's potentially 4 doorways to a different dimension, or from a different dimension. I don't know if they're 2-way doors. Now think about that. 1.3 million 5 deaths a year from car-related incidents. That's a lot of deaths and an awful lot of mirrors suddenly opening up as portals to these demonic creatures. Is that the true reason for all the cars on the road? Are the ease of travel and convenience of not having to carry your shopping home merely byproducts, a way of sweetening the pot? Like that idea that Hitler gave everybody portable radios because they could listen to music and to news and stuff, but realistically it was just to spread propaganda. But they give them this thing, oh look how great this is, but this is actually what we're doing with it. You could probably tie it into a few things, but I don't know if anyone's ever tried to tie it to cars. They've done it to convince us to drive around the portals around the world, allowing these creatures, I imagine, relatively safe passage into our world. It's worth thinking about, innit? Is the whole idea of global warming caused by CO2 and cars purely concocted tripe because they would rather have people believe in those invisible forces disrupting our world rather than have people know the actual truth about the actual invisible forces that are trying to act in our world? Is there a third, more powerful group that is playing the cars and cyclists against each other, getting the best of both worlds in every sense of the term? More mirrors in the world, more doorways, more crashes in cars, more deaths, and even more extra deaths now caused by cars clipping the unarmoured cyclists. Then, whilst they park their car away to await the ambulance and they reach an emotional fever pitch because they may have just paralysed or killed someone, and, you know, obviously we've learned recently if they're wealthy, they're getting sued, and if they're poor, they're going to prison. And you know what loves these negative emotions? What's drawn to these negative emotions? Extra-dimensional entities. By feeling bad about accidentally killing a cyclist, you could be solely responsible for an interdimensional takeover. So, I guess if you do accidentally cause a crash, you gotta own it, mate. Don't feel sad, or at least, don't show it around a mirror, because there's a good chance that's all cars were actually invented for. And that's the end of the show, guys. That's all I've really got on cars. Thanks for listening. I hope you have learnt something this week. Don't forget to give Truth Seeking a go. You can find Truth Seeking and my show on all different streaming platforms now, and leave us a rating as well on either or, or both, ideally. Or fucking see us in a bit, guys. Thanks for listening, man. If you enjoyed the show, you should probably go and try Truth Seeking. That's TROOF Seeking, as in like SEEKING, not like a fucking type of helicopter. But it's me and Jimmy Budd, a comedian from the UK, from England, like me. Don't know why I'm saying it like that. Either way, though, go and fucking have a listen. You can find one or two in the feed for this. There's the Crop Duster, but there should be, by the point you're listening to this, at least 15 episodes going out for Truth Seeking. So you might enjoy that, mate, and fucking leave a review on here and that. Leave a comment if you've watched it on YouTube. And if you do have YouTube as well, you can actually watch some of these. You can have them playing on a loop with my cartoon playing on a loop whilst you listen to 4 or 5 episodes of it. So, maybe throw that on at night time or something, because that might help as well, because that might mean I can eventually monetize my YouTube. Anyway, fucking thanks for listening, man. I'll see you in a bit.